I'm doing another relationship chart today, basically to show you that Horary astrology can give invaluable insight, including your past, your present, and your future relationships. Okay, the background information on the querent is that it's a female asking the question. Her first marriage was a very difficult, abusive marriage. So she wanted to know, if she marries again, what would this marriage be like? Now, as usual, we look at all the players. Since this is a relationship chart, there are some differences that are specific only to relationship chart. But the querent is female, and she is identified as the ruler of the first house. So we have a Sagittarius on the cusp, so that means that she's represented by Jupiter to represent her as a thinking person. She also gets Venus to represent her as a woman, or the part of her that wants a mate. And this is specific only to relationship charts that we do this. And because she's the querent, she gets the moon to represent her feeling side, her heart. And then the person she's asking about, the potential mate, future husband, is the seventh house ruler. And we see Gemini here on the cusp. So he's represented by Mercury, and Mercury represents him as a thinking person. And because it's a relationship chart, he also gets the sun to represent him as a man, or the part of him that wants a mate, or like what my teacher, John Frawley, calls it, I think is hilarious, is he calls it his trousers. So that would mean his sexual attraction to the querent. Now, right away, before we even go any further, this really stood out to me, and that is where the north and the south nodes of the moon are. The south node of the moon is at 8 degrees, so it's within 5 degrees of the ascendant, so it's considered to be on the ascendant. And the south node represents some kind of losing, deteriorating situation. And the north node of the moon is always exactly opposite the south node of the moon, and it's within 5 degrees of the seventh house cusp. So this shows some kind of gaining good situation for him. So that right away is not looking good immediately for what the future marriage would be like. So let's start with the querent's planets. Jupiter, which represents her thinking side, is retrograde. When a planet is retrograde in a context like this shows that she's thinking about the past, and what she's remembering is her first marriage. It is also in the sign of Aquarius. Well, let's look at the dignities for Aquarius. When a planet is in the sign of Aquarius, it's ruled by Saturn, and the sun is in detriment in the sign of Aquarius. So Saturn in this chart is her second house ruler, and the second house is her self-esteem. Also, the things that she has to give herself, like her resources, her attention, her affection. Also, in the sign of Aquarius, the sun is in detriment. So this means there is something about him as a man, or it could be men in general, that she really doesn't like or is very disappointed by and or is afraid of. And based on her first marriage, that makes sense. Now we can look at his main planet, which is Mercury, and the first thing we notice is that it's combust the sun. So that means there's something about him that she cannot see clearly. I imagine what she'll would be the sun in Leo, which would be a very attractive man, somebody who's confident and very sure of themselves, very masculine. This could be quite attractive. But Mercury in horary astrology, especially when it's combust, can indicate somebody who is not representing themselves truthfully, or at the very least, they are hiding something. I mean, since it's combust, she wouldn't be able to see these qualities about him until the Mercury was far enough away from the sun. And then that would be symbolic of her being able to see that Mercury itself is ruled by the sun, which means ruled by him as a man. So he is loving himself, basically, And it's a day chart, so we see it's ruled by the sun, and it's in the triplicity of the sun. So the triplicity is not quite as good as its own sign or as good as exaltation, but it's still pretty good. So that just shows that he's really liking himself. And then we go over here and we see that Saturn is in detriment here. So this means Mercury being ruled by the sun and hidden by the sun is going to be harmful to her self-esteem, her resources, which could be her self-esteem. Somehow it isn't good for her. Now it's at 16 degrees. Now the way that works is this is the term area, and term is less than triplicity. Rulership is the highest that you can get in a love relationship. It means that the person sees you realistically and loves you anyway. Exaltation is also pretty nice, but that's typically the beginning of the relationship. Or it's somebody who is sincerely loving that other person or infatuated with that person, but there's something unrealistic about it. And triplicity is still pretty good, but it could be friendship. Like it could be a strong friendship with no romantic feelings involved. And when we get to term, this is much less than rulership, exaltation, and triplicity. It's like it's barely above indifference, which is what face is. So I don't even bother looking at face sometimes. And the way the terms work is you see the 6 here, 13, 19, 25, 30. It starts at 0 and goes to 6 degrees. Not 6 degrees in 1 minute, just 6 degrees. So the term Mercury at 16 degrees of Leo is not in the terms of Saturn. Now when you go here to Mercury itself, Mercury goes from 6 degrees and like a minute to 13 degrees. And then after 13 degrees, we got 13 degrees and 1 minute, and you're in the terms of Venus. So at 16 degrees, it shows that he likes her by term as a woman, which is not a heck of a lot. Now, we can look at the sun as well, because that represents him too, him as a man, and that's at 12 degrees. And what we see is the sun is in his own sign. So he's basically loving himself. It also represents someone who tends to want everything on their terms. It's like my way or the highway kind of thing. It's in a fixed sign as well. Leo's a fixed sign. It's at only 12 degrees. And Mercury is at only 16 degrees, which is only 1 degree past halfway through the sign, which means that this is an unchanging situation. He's not going to be any different from the beginning of the relationship to the end of the relationship. Now, back to the sun at 12 degrees. And as we know, the sun is loving itself because it's ruled by itself. It's at 12 degrees. So that means it's in the terms of Mercury. And we'll find out what Mercury is, because at this point in time, we don't really know what Mercury is yet. Another thing to notice here, the moon is waning. It's very close to the sun. The next sign it goes into is Leo. So a waning moon describes the overall situation, and that is, it's not a growing thing. It's actually something that is dying. It's not going to last. There's another planet that we look at, and that is the marriage planet itself. And this is revealed by the Arabian parts. The formula that I use for the part of marriage is the ascendant plus the descendant minus Venus, and then to calculate it quickly, because sometimes I have to do this during a consultation, is I use this website. It's the Libra Center and the Arabic Parts Calculator. I did that already, but if you go to that website, it's pretty self-explanatory. You can see easily how to do it. And I calculated it, and the part of marriage turns out to be in Virgo. And what you look at is not the part of marriage itself, but the dispositor of the part of marriage. So since it's in Virgo, it means that Mercury, the dispositor or the ruler of Virgo, actually represents the marriage. So the marriage itself is represented by Mercury here in Leo. And as you can see immediately, is basically the marriage is under his control. And we've already established that it's not very good for her emotionally or basically her self-esteem. And now we know why Venus is in Virgo. The woman part of her loves being married. And that's because even in today's day and age, in many ways, a woman has more status if she's married than if she's single, especially if she's older. It just gives her status in her community. So being married, even if it's not a great marriage, it still has some benefit for the woman. So she's ruled by the marriage. She's exalting him and loving him. Well, she's exalting him, which means she's not seeing him clearly yet. She's infatuated. And we can see here by looking at Mercury, or actually Venus, in Virgo. We see that it's ruled by Mercury, it's exalting Mercury, but it has some dignity by triplicity. So that is showing that the benefit to her of being married. But if you go over here, under detriment and fall, we see that it also harms her as a person and is much worse for her as a woman than it is good for her. And then finally, the last thing that we see here, there is an approaching opposition aspect between his planets and her main planet. They end up making an exact opposition at 28 degrees and 23 minutes. Once you calculate it out, the marriage would last for about 12 months and 3 weeks or so. Now, when you see this kind of thing in a horary, especially if the person asks relationship questions more than once, and every time that you do a horary for them, the horary has a disappointing or negative outcome, then that means it's time to look at the birth chart and to see what's actually going on there. Because there could be marriage-preventing yogas, there could be very poor relationship capacity, but that's where horary and natal astrology can really help each other. So if you have any questions about this, please comment down below. I love your comments. I love responding to you, and I will write back to every single one of you. And until next time, thank you for watching.